There were many great leaders and military strategists in World War II, but the battles were won and lost by the soldiers, sailors, and airmen who manned the weapons and engaged the enemy. Many would not return home, and most who did come home would not return decorated heroes. They simply played a role to help win the war. Some of those soldiers, sailors, and airmen emerged as unlikely heroes. They were simply ordinary men and women who took action in the moment. Today, we will meet some of the actors and actresses who served in the war, but we will focus our attention on one actor in particular. Before we get to our main character, there are a few other actors worth mentioning. Younger generations will remember Yogi Berra for his funny clips and quotes. In reality, he was a truly great baseball player and manager whose career put him in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Yogi played in 10 World Series championships. Yogi was an all-star for 15 seasons, and he won the American League MVP award in 3 of them. It is fun to remember his crazy quotes, but in some ways, those quotes have overshadowed his baseball career. You might not be aware that Yogi served in World War II. In fact, he was awarded the Purple Heart for injuries sustained as gunner's mate on the USS Bayfield when Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. There is a funny story that Yogi tried to decline the Purple Heart because he didn't want his mother to worry about him. Yogi Berra was unique in many respects. He made us laugh. He demonstrated his great skills on the baseball field, and he served his country on the battlefield. He was unique, but he was also like so many who served in our armed services. He left his chosen career and he went overseas to do battle with the enemy. Then he returned home to a civilian life. In the emotional aftermath of Pearl Harbor, men and women were eager to serve. Some enlisted to serve on the front lines and others served in support roles. Recruitment, factory workers, office workers, and administrators. Entertainers worked to boost morale through USO events. Some professional baseball players suspended their baseball careers to play in recreational leagues overseas. There are hundreds of stories. Then there's Art Carney. He was Jackie Gleason's co-star on the comedy series Honeymooners, and Walter Matthau. Great actor from The Odd Couple and Grumpy Old Men and many others. Frank Sutton, who played Marine Sergeant Carter on the Gomer Pyle TV series. He actually failed the Marine Corps physical, but served in the Army during World War II. I found this interesting. Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, actually served in military intelligence. During World War II, Sean Connery, who was the original James Bond, was not old enough to serve in World War II, but he did join the Royal Navy in 1946, following the war. How about this? Adolf Hitler was apparently a fan of Clark Gable. It was rumored that Hitler offered a reward for anyone who could capture Clark Gable alive. Mickey Rooney served under General Patton, and comedian Mel Brooks served in the Battle of the Bulge. My favorite actor was Jimmy Stewart. He was one of the greatest actors of all time. Not only was he a great actor, he served with distinction during World War II. Jimmy began his acting career in 1935, and his first starring role was the 1936 film Speed, and he shared the screen with some of the greatest actors of all time. Jimmy was nominated for the Academy Award several times. By the start of the war, Jimmy's hits included You Can't Take It With You, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, in which he was nominated for an Academy Award. Destry Rides Again was a Western comedy where Stewart co-starred with Marlene Dietrich. Stewart received an Academy Award for his performance in The Philadelphia Story, where his co-stars included Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. He already had a great career before the outbreak of World War II. Jimmy Stewart loved airplanes. As a boy, he saved up money from his paper route to take a ride in a biplane. Then he spent weeks trying to convince his mother that it was safe. After he graduated from Princeton, Jimmy took flying lessons and acquired his private and commercial licenses. Then he was convinced that America would be pulled into the war in Europe. So he bought a Stinson 105, much like the one here. The Army was using the Stinson to train its pilots. Jimmy wanted to serve, and he wanted to serve as a pilot. The B-24 Liberator you see in the background was the type of plane that Colonel Stewart flew during World War II. When he tried to enlist, the Army turned him down. He was tall, but he only weighed 138 pounds. They said he was too skinny. Jimmy started eating spaghetti twice a day and supplemented with steaks and milkshakes. At a second physical in March of 1941, he still hadn't gained quite enough weight to be eligible, but he talked the Army doctors into adding an ounce or two so he could qualify. Jimmy ran outside shouting to fellow actor Burgess Meredith, "I'm in! I'm in!" Jimmy Stewart was inducted into the Army on March 22nd, 1941. He was sent to Fort MacArthur in California, and his annual salary went from roughly $600,000 to just over $250. The Army wanted to use his celebrity status to promote the war efforts, but Jimmy wanted to serve in a more tangible way. Jimmy was wrapping up production of Ziegfeld Girl, co-starring Lana Turner, Judy Garland, and Hedy Lamarr when he enlisted in the Air Corps as a private. He spent 9 months training at Moffett Field, California, where he studied for and passed the exam to be commissioned. His 400 hours of flying time got him into the cadet program, but not without a fight. Stewart was in his 30s. Most military pilots were in their early 20s. In 1943, Stewart became commander of the 703rd Squadron, 445th Bomber Group in Sioux City, Iowa. In November of the same year, he was promoted to captain. That same year, Stewart led 24 B-24 Liberators from Florida through Brazil, through Senegal and Morocco. They became part of the 2nd Air Division, 8th Air Force, stationed at Tiburon. By January of 1944, Stewart had commanded all 4 squadrons of the 445th Bomber Group. He was promoted to the rank of major, and in April 1945, Jimmy Stewart was promoted to colonel and chief of staff of the 2nd Air Division. Jimmy ended the war having served in 20 active combat missions. He returned to his acting career, but he remained in the U.S. Air Force Reserves, where he served as reserve commander of Dobbins Air Force Base. On July 23, 1959, James Maitland Stewart was promoted to the rank of brigadier general. He retired from military service on May 31, 1968. Even with his accomplishments as a military aviator, both in training and in active service, Hollywood still would not let him fly. Here he is in a scene from the movie Spirit of St. Louis. In the classic film, It's a Wonderful Life, there is a scene where his character, George Bailey, is praying. The prayer hit Jimmy at a very personal and emotional level. He later reflected on that moment. As I said those words, I felt the loneliness and hopelessness of people who had nowhere to turn, and my eyes filled with tears. I broke down sobbing. This was not planned at all, but the power of that prayer, the realization that our Father in heaven is there to help the hopeless, had reduced me to tears. Great scene from a great movie and a great actor. Jimmy and Gloria Stewart were married from 1949 until her death in 1994. 45 years. Jimmy was raised in a Presbyterian church in Indiana and expressed a strong love and admiration for his father. Jimmy Stewart died at the age of 89 on July 2nd, 1997. He was the recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. When he was interviewed later in life, he said, "World War II is something I think about almost every day. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life." In the wake of Pearl Harbor, many were eager to join the war effort. There are hundreds of stories of actors, athletes, and other famous people who put their lives and careers on hold to take on a formidable and well-equipped enemy. Christ has called all of us to follow him and to become disciples. As disciples, he has called us to the spiritual battlefield. He has called us to be his warriors. Enlistment in his army involves a serious level of commitment as we face formidable foes against the world, the flesh, and the devil. Our service in this war will have eternal consequences for those held captive by Satan and his emissaries. You've probably learned a lot about Paul, Peter, John, Matthew, Thomas, and a few others, but there are many others who served the cause of Christ. One of the lesser-known characters in the Bible is Silas. Who was he, and what did he do? He appears several times in the New Testament. Most of them appear in the book of Acts. In Acts 15, the apostles and elders referred to him as one of the leading men among the brothers. Silas was sent to Antioch along with Judas Barsabbas to work with Paul and Barnabas. In 1 Peter 5, Peter refers to him as a faithful brother. The book of Acts tells us that Silas accompanied Paul on his second missionary journey and experienced everything that Paul experienced. On Paul's second missionary journey, he and Silas traveled to Greece. In Philippi, they were arrested, beaten, and imprisoned. But about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. When God miraculously released them, the jailer, having witnessed their faith, asked them, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" The jailer was saved that night, and he and his family were all baptized. The next day, the city officials learned that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, and they were immediately fearful. Their mistreatment of Paul and Silas the day before had violated Roman law. Think about that for a moment. Paul's missionary journey took 3 years to complete. Silas was with him. They traveled 2,700 miles over a 3-year period. They camped together. They ate their meals together. Theirs had to be a close relationship. Can you imagine what life was like for them on their trip? Silas was imprisoned with Paul. Silas was beaten with Paul. Silas likely experienced everything that Paul experienced. Before his conversion, Paul was an enemy of Christ and his church. Paul did not choose Christ. Christ chose him. But Paul did not serve alone. He served with Silas, Timothy, Judas Barsabbas, John Mark, Phoebe, and many others. All of these, including Paul himself, were ordinary men and women in the service of an extraordinary God. Joshua was chosen to lead the people of Israel following the death of Moses. God called Joshua to lead his people into Jericho to take the land. In Joshua 2, we are told that Joshua sent 2 spies to check out Jericho. There, they met a prostitute whose name was Rahab. Instead of exposing the spies, Rahab hid them from the king of Jericho. Rahab already knew that the Lord had given Jericho to the people of Israel. She acknowledged the fear of her own people. She had heard how God had delivered Israel from their enemies. She acknowledged the power and sovereignty of God. Rahab protected the spies and asked that they remember her act of kindness. The 2 spies promised, "If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you." Jericho was completely destroyed. Only Rahab and her family were spared. God could have chosen a more righteous person to aid the spies, but he chose Rahab. Rahab married Salmon, who was an Israelite from the tribe of Judah. Their son was Boaz. Boaz married Ruth. From this uncomfortable beginning, a Gentile prostitute is in the direct lineage leading to Jesus Christ. Hebrews 11 lists a number of the great heroes of our faith. Rahab's name is listed among them. James 2 makes reference to Rahab's faith by comparing it to Abraham. Matthew 1 tells us that Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. As we follow the genealogy, we see Salmon, the father of Boaz. Obed was the son of Rahab and Boaz, and that lineage leads us to Jesse and then David. Ultimately, we follow that lineage to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Jesus' human lineage includes an evil king, it includes an adulterer and murderer, and it includes a Gentile prostitute. Even back to Abraham, whose lack of faith led him to lie to a pagan king about Sarah, his wife. God did not choose people we might expect. His glory shines brightest with ordinary men and women who respond to his call. 1 Corinthians 1 says, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God." 1 Corinthians 12 tells us that every single member of the church is important to its mission. Through the baptism of the Holy Spirit, we stand as one body, and every part of the body plays an important role. 1 Corinthians 12 tells us God is the one who determines who and where we will serve. He has endowed us with talents. He has given us spiritual gifts by his own choosing. Note the closing phrase in verse 26. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. One body, one spirit, many gifts. As we read of the missionary journeys of Paul, we should not forget the people he traveled, worked, and suffered with. Likewise, Rahab, a Gentile prostitute who played an important role in delivering Jericho into the hands of Israel and God. There are hundreds of unsung heroes of the faith in the Bible. Some of Jesus' own disciples received little recognition, as well as many who served in the early church. Most were persecuted for their faith, but remained faithful in their service. Few of us will ever be called to stand on the public stage, preach a sermon, or be called into full-time service on the mission field. Even fewer will be called to sacrifice our lives for the cause of Christ. Yet there is much work to be done. Some of us will work completely behind the scenes with no recognition or notoriety. Some are called to serve in small groups, working with youth in short-term mission projects, mercy-related projects, hospital visitation, ministry to the elderly and infirmed, and the list goes on. All Christians are called to serve. Matthew Henry tells us, "How blessed a Christian church if all the members did their duty. Instead of coveting the highest stations or the most splendid gifts, let us leave the appointment of his instruments to God and those in whom he works by his providence. Remember, those will not be approved hereafter who seek the chief places, but those who are most faithful to the trust placed in them and most diligent in their master's work." Thank you for taking the time to listen.